just sold a farm in Rankin like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
It was actually, it wasn't big. It was like four acres. It was Drew from 18th Street.
Oh, nice.
He bought like a little hobby farm to like just get away, I think like over pandemic, people had been lending him, their lake house, and I think he was doing that Airbnb, but it was at a farm, and they would have like a fifth wheel, or you could camp or something, and then he was just like, oh, I gotta get a farm. So
nice. You should have got some acreage down there. It's probably not too bad.
Well, it's just to get started, but maybe, I mean, it's just kind of, it's kind of like, it was like an hour east of Champaign, but then it was an hour west of like Lafayette. I mean, it was.
Well, it's north of Champaign too. It's like you go Paxton, and then you go through Paxton, and
yeah, I think I got off the highway at Paxton to go to it.
So there's a bar and grill there called Fat Albert's.
Okay.
They have a 1 pound hamburger. So that's something to try next time when you're visiting.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to see what he turns it into. The listing agency who had that, they were out of Champaign, and they would have to send a property manager out from Champaign like once a week to go,
that's all.
Make sure that no one like broke in the farmhouse or mess things up in the stables or whatever.
Right. It's got stables. Wow.
Got a stables. It had like a small livestock building, which I think was probably like sheep and hogs. It had a chicken coop. It's not a bad little parcel. Right at 4 acres, like 3.99 something. So.
Nice.
Yeah.
I had a friend there, and we used to go there. We go there in the fall, and they'd have hay rides, and there's all those pumpkin fields around there, and we'd go jump out and steal a bunch of pumpkins.
Hey Jim, what beer do you think we're going to start off with?
We'll do the Helles, and then we'll do the Dunkels Bock, and then hopefully we'll get through those pretty quickly, because that's not really the focus. Those are just the compare and contrast styles. And then we'll spend most of our time on the lowboy, on the Maibock.
Okay. So the Dovetail first?
Uh-huh.
You trying to throw me off?
Still in the doghouse, Rich?
Yeah, dog's out here with me. Yeah. We're both out here today.
So Patty and James are doing what Nancy and I are doing here. We're all squeezing into the same Zoom box.
Works.
I was telling folks, we usually, when we're on the same Zoom meeting, go to different rooms and have different machines. But tonight we're sharing cans of beer, so.
How romantic.
Exactly. Hey, Todd.
Hey, guys.
How are things? How's everyone in your household?
Yeah, everyone's good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone in bed already, or?
She's actually grabbing dinner with friends. So I was on dad duty until 20 minutes ago, and now it's dad time.
Quiet time.
Yeah,
So
Put a
what
little
time,
Maibock
what
and
time does
stick
your
it
little
up
one
and
usually go to bed?
sleep.
7.
Nice.
Yeah, so he's been pretty good about that time, give or take 20 minutes each side.
Hey, Jim, what are we starting with?
The Helles.
All right, thank you.
I'm gonna run my computer. I'm gonna go grab a computer cord.
Sure. Well, shall we give folks a couple more minutes to join us? That's a fancy background Ben Resch has.
Yeah, thank you. Trying to fly the company colors here, I guess.
Well, and you know, that may be about the best, I don't know what you call it, but usually when folks try and do that, I mean, the person ends up flickering in and out, you know, but that actually looks sort of real.
Yeah, I should have told you I was at the club. That would have been a better answer. Huh?
Hey, everyone, on my screen, it's, oh, no, he's leaving. The upper left-hand corner of my screen, at least, is Dave Campbell. He's a brewer the brewer at On Tour, and he's still at the brew house there tonight. He's got some keg stuff he's doing, I guess.
So that's not just a cool Zoom background. He's actually in a brewery.
He is not doing the Ben Resch thing. So there are a couple folks I don't know here. So I'm just gonna, well, I don't know in person at least. Reginald Payne, I think I know you on Slack, right?
Yes. Through
You're
Slack
Reginald, right?
Yep.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to put a face and a name together. And there's Cheryl, although I'm going to get in trouble either way, man. So.
Yeah, just have another couple beers. You'll think I am Cheryl, but that's my wife. But yeah, my name's Terry Jolino. My first meeting here. So I joined today. I'm a web member at the moment.
Welcome.
Yeah. So
Welcome, that's awesome.
yeah. So looking forward to it, guys. I got my 3 beers. I'm ready to go. So thanks.
Are you a Chicago guy?
Yeah, well, I live in Park Ridge, but I lived in Chicago for about 15 years. I got 3 kids. They all go to Maine South up here at up in Park Ridge.
Cool.
So, but you know, yeah, I consider myself a city guy.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice.
You brew beer too, or just drink it?
Yeah, so I want to get back into it. So I've got a bunch of old equipment, and that's exactly what I found. That if you brewed like 10 years ago, the equipment is it's a lot better now. And so yeah, I was thinking about maybe becoming like an apprentice, type of membership, so I could utilize some of the equipment that you guys have. So
fantastic.
Cool.
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, I'll tell you, when I went from brewing at home to brewing at the Chaos Brew House, my brew days went from 6 or 7 hours to 4. It's a lot faster.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And it's our giant cleaning ability that makes it go so much quicker.
I mean, it seemed like it's all organized, right? So you got big sinks and it's all set up for that versus, trying to set something out up in your garage or in your kitchen sink, So it makes sense.
Well, it's a good way to meet people, a good way to at least be able to stop by the brew house and check it out, or come by for someone's brew day and just hang out and see what it's all about before you have to make that jump, and if you want to again, or cool.
Yeah, no, great, man. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, Reed's got the fancy background too.
Yeah, it's the Goose Island Brew Barrel Warehouse with the Chaos logo above it.
Nice.
Wow, nice.
Well, yours looks pretty good too. You're not fading in and out and all that. And
Well, the
now
fact that
Dave's
it's Reed,
going with
he
the
could
same
actually
thing.
be
He's got
there.
a background.
Yeah, I haven't been there for hours. It's been hours.
It's been hours since Reed's been to Goose Island.
Oh, it's been 14 minutes since I've been at the Fulton place.
Nice, nice. Well, I think the other person here I hadn't met before is Dan, although I think I know you on Slack, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm here now.
it's nice to see you. It's nice to put a face and a name together.
Yeah, it's nice.
All right, well, we've given folks a little bit of time to come in late. Should we just get going, and knowing some folks may come in and out?
Sure. Yeah.
And Hugh's here too.
I'm sorry?
And then new brewer Hugh is here too.
There we go. There we go.
I'm also a new brewer too, Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Mark. All right. So let's just give you a quick overview of what we're going to do tonight. We're going to start with just a few I'm going to quickly kind of go through, which for most of you I think is just going to be old news, but the quick kind of BJCP rubric for tasting beer as opposed to just drinking it. Then Patty's going to talk to us a little bit about the competition, whatever she wants to say about that. Then I'm going to quickly kind of bring us through the tasting and the styles for the Helles and the Dunkels Bock from Old Irving. We're going to try and not spend a ton of time on those, because the idea is that those are the compare and contrast styles to help us understand the Maibock or the Helles Bock. Then Jeff's going to bring us some info about the history and the cultural and social context of the Helles Bock or the Maibock style. And then Kyle's going to tell us about the style from the BJCP point of view, and then lead us through the tasting. And then we're going to end up with Dave Campbell from On Tour, who has said he's got full access to the On Tour Brewing notebook for the style. He's going to give us all the secrets they have, and then just be available to talk with us about whatever we'd like. Sound good? All right, so let's start with the BJCP rubric. I'm going to share my screen with you.
That's a lot of clicking you're doing.
I know. Usually I share videos when I'm doing these things, and yeah. All right, there we are. Can you all see that?
Yeah.
All right. So this is just the basic rubric that we're going to use when we're talking about tasting the beers. We start with the aroma first. We start with that because there's volatile compounds that may dissipate pretty quickly, and you're looking for for malt and grain first, and then there's going to be hop aromas, and there's maybe esters, and then other sorts of aromas. Another reason we focus on the aroma first is because we have so much more sensitivity to aroma than we do flavor. Just physiologically, we've got many by thousands more receptors for aroma than we do flavor, and it just impacts our ability to perceive flavor. The other thing about aroma is we're much more able to associate aromas with things. For example, in flavor, how would you describe the flavor of a banana other than saying it tastes like a banana, right? I mean, it's hard to describe that. But if you smell a banana, it reminds you of all sorts of different things. It's just the way our brain is built. The next thing we look at is the appearance, and really you're just looking at the color of the beer, the clarity of the beer, and then the different factors related to the head. Then when we get to the flavor, we look at the same things that we did with the aroma, the malt, the hop flavors, and esters. But the other things we're looking for here that are a little different than the aroma, we're looking for bitterness. You know, sometimes people will say, well, there's a really hoppy beer. Well, you know, do you mean there's hop flavor and aroma, or do you mean there's bitterness? Because they're both come from hops, and those are different characters. The other thing we look for is balance. In the beers we're trying tonight, malt to bitterness balance is going to be a critical thing, but there are other ways of looking at balance. Fermentation character, clean, fruity, spicy, alcoholic, and then of course any off flavors like medicinal, oxidation, or plastic. We want to get a handle on how dry or sweet the beer is, and then we also want to think a little bit about the finish and the aftertaste. Then there's the mouthfeel, which usually we think of that in terms of the body of the beer, the carbonation of the beer, if there's any astringency or creaminess, and if there's any alcohol warmth. Finally, at the end, I didn't put it up here, but you bring all these things together into kind of your overall impression of the beer, which is another way of saying, does it work? All right. Anyone want to add anything to that or have any questions about that? All right.
Hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Just like on the Dovetail, you know, just looking at from an appearance standpoint, I mean, if we're looking at the same beer, I mean, do you think that's chill haze, or do you think that that's not really filtering, or?
I don't know if they filter their beer or not. I would describe this as mostly clear. I mean, it's not brilliantly clear, at least in mine, but it's mostly clear.
They don't filter, I know that.
Yeah.
And I also think they tend to push the canning a little quicker than they'd like to, just to keep it rolling.
Sure. Hey, Sean. So we'll come back to this beer and go through the tasting of this. But all right, anything else before we move on? Hey, Patty, why don't you tell us whatever you'd like to tell us about the competition?
Well, I'm very excited to see that when I checked the forums, we have 7 teams so far.
17 teams?
Seven teams.
Oh,
So,
7 teams.
7 teams. And that makes it a lot easier for me to figure out who's still looking for a team. So I will be reaching out to some of the more experienced brewers to see if they'll take on a few of the less experienced brewers. If you know anyone who is not on Slack, just if you could private message me that they might be looking for a team. It's really hard for me to find and follow all the different threads of who's looking for a team. I think I have a pretty good idea right now. And so probably Monday I'll do something so people can say, oh, my team hasn't signed up yet and we need to sign up or something like that.
So like if the teams doubled in the last day?
They went from like 3 to 7. So yeah, they more than doubled. Because for a long time it was just 1.
Well, I mean, it's the chaos last minute stuff.
Yeah. But I just want to make sure that we account for everyone, and yeah, it's the last minutes that are going to be harder for this round, because when we do the virtual tastings or the judging, it's a lot harder to make sure we have enough judges. If people like a week before we do the judging are like, oh, I joined, and like, I don't have any record of you joining, so I'll be a little more aggressive this time around with that. Any other questions or anything like that?
Is there anyone here who wants to get on a team or that isn't at this point? And you can use the chat thing. You could send a note to Patty tonight or just raise your hand or something.
Yeah, I'd like to be on a team. That'd be cool.
I took down, yes, so I was looking at the names on the screens of people I didn't necessarily recognize from the feeds, and I've been trying to make sure that I take down your names to follow up with you after the fact.
Yeah, awesome. I'll type it in here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That's all I got.
All right. So let's get into it. So one of the challenges we noticed right away when we decided to do this tasting to get ready for the competition is there were almost no commercial Maibocks available anywhere around here. It's a little too early in the season for the seasonal stuff. And for whatever reason, the local breweries, except for On Tour, just weren't brewing them. So we're fortunate that the On Tour beer was available to us. But so that then led us to think, well, rather than only tasting the On Tour, one way to kind of get your head around styles is to put a style in the context of other styles. If you're someone like me who brews beer that isn't always to style, that can be really helpful. Kind of, for example, I love American IPAs because I'm an American and I like hops. But my favorite American IPAs to brew are maltier than the style usually calls for. So if I happen to do one with some caramel in it, it can be a red IPA. But I like my pale IPAs to be a little maltier than the style really calls for. Well, to kind of be able to move between the styles and get a sense of where things are can be really helpful in knowing, I don't enter those IPAs in competitions, right? Because I know they're a little bit outside. So tonight, we're going to think about the Maibock and spend most of our time on that, but we're going to approach it first through these other two kind of related styles. The first is the Helles. So the name for the Maibock these days in BJCP parlance is Helles Bock, right? There isn't a BJCP style called Maibock anymore, but it is the Helles Bock. It's the same beer. Well, one way to think about a Helles Bock is that it is a Helles brewed up to Bock strength, right? And that's basically what it is. If any of you have looked at the recipe so far, that really is true. So everyone who has a Helles, if you want to smell. I mean, this is a pretty good example of a Helles. So the aroma I think has a nice kind of soft, a little bit of sweet graininess to it. The malt is, clearly the predominant aroma, at least in my example here. And that's what the style should be. It should be pale. It should be enough when we get to the tasting, that it should have enough hops in it to provide some balance to keep it from being cloying or sweet, but it should still be malt forward. It should be well attenuated. It shouldn't have a sweet sense to it. Should be relatively clean. Shouldn't have really any esters. Sometimes in some Helleses, you'll get some DMS. That kind of DMS is usually considered a malt flavor, but in a Helles, it's not required to be there, but it's not a flaw if there's a little bit of that there.
And you do have some in that one, do you think?
In the aroma?
Yeah.
Maybe. Are you getting it as corn, you mean? Yeah. To me, it's grainy, but yeah.
Michael, I don't think it's as bad as my Grisette. Thank you.
So we've already talked a little bit about the appearance, whether it's not really brilliantly clear, but it's pretty clear. It's I'd call this kind of a middle of the road yellow. It should be quite pale. I mean, it can be kind of a light gold, but it shouldn't be like a deep gold, right? And that's about as dark as it can get. My example's maybe not as effervescent as I'd want it to be. I mean, the style can should have quite a bit of effervescence to it. I think the body's really nice. I'd say it's kind of medium light body. There's a little bit of creaminess. Anyone have anything they'd like to add to any of this? I've probably
Yeah,
talked
Jim.
enough about this.
Question on this beer. When I tasted on the back end, it's a slightly reminiscent of an adjunct macro brew lager. You can sort of identify that relationship between a Helles and what became the backbone of American lagers, and when all the German brewers came over. I mean, it's not overly so, but I don't know if you could taste that all. It's on the back end, certainly not on the front end.
Can you put a word to it? What that flavor is in the aftertaste?
Maybe it's a little bit of corn. I don't know.
Could be.
Yeah.
It adds corn and sweet.
Yeah, there is a little sweetness in that finish, maybe. But I don't think it's technically sweet. I mean, I think it's an impression of sweet. I think it's malt sweetness,
On the back end, there's a little sweetness on the back end, and I think that's the mouthfeel is a little reminiscent of some of the macro brews.
Yep.
Something like a Helles, assuming that Dovetail is doing things like they normally would, corn or other adjunct wouldn't really be appropriate in a Helles. So it's probably another flavor. I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
Just
It could be that little DMS thing. I don't know.
Jim, you're distinguishing real sweetness from malt sweetness or something like that?
Right. Well, sugar sweetness versus kind of, if you have maltiness, that in malt forward beers, malt by itself gives you an impression of sweetness, even if the beer ends up technically dry.
Like how bread tastes sweet.
Right.
Right, but the cream corn DMS thing might be sweetness for people where they assume there's some sort of sweetness from the corn type taste of the DMS.
Right.
And I also give it as like how it sits on your palate after the fact, and as you let it just kind of sit there without taking another sip. As we're talking about with some of those macro brews, those get like kind of crisp where they're still like malty sweet. And that's one factor of that they don't have a lot of hop bitterness in them. And this doesn't either from what I can perceive. And then it's just the residual sugar, which is, a little correlation of what the final gravity is going to be. And that's kind of what I perceive in this beer here is that, the final gravity might be a little bit high. It doesn't finish as crisp as I would kind of think a Helles to finish at, but it's still, to me, it's very clean. And like, I just posted mine in the chat. I think I got actually a really fresh example. So that could be playing a part as well. But it could just be some of that residual sugar, because as your final gravity is higher, that's just sugar that's in solution, and that sits on your palate a little bit heavier, giving that impression of sweetness.
Yep.
That's a great way to describe it, Kyle.
In terms of the finish, Kyle, I think the guidelines say that it typically isn't crisp in the way that you think of like a Pilsner being crisp.
Yeah.
And I think the word that I use often for it is soft. There's a roundedness to it, to the finish.
Yeah.
And I could see how someone could say, well, that's sweet, that's similar, that's kind of that mouthfeel sweet thing you're saying.
Yeah,
I
think round and balance is awesome descriptor, but I think Kyle said it's lending a little sweetness to it, so it's a little sweeter than being round and balanced.
It could be.
I also agree completely with Alex. I can't imagine Bill and Hagen using like an adjunct in their beer. So
Chicago's own Reinheitsgebot disciples.
I've always liked the slight fermentation character you get on the nose of this. From a lot of the Dovetail beers have that slight sulfur character that, right off the pour you get, and then dissipates quickly, but it lends a little bit to the fresh out of the, fresh beer essentially.
Yep. A little sulfur is certainly allowed, and it does, like you say, dissipate quickly. I didn't get any when I opened my can, but it.
I got a little bit of sulfur and just a quick hit of juicy fruit.
Ah, interesting.
You know, and then some light grass and then grain.
And then not to get too in the weeds, but like when people are talking about the sulfur, I always kind of break it down and there's two categories of it. And I can't really put my finger on a good descriptor about what I call the pleasant sulfur, which is what this is. But then there's the unpleasant sulfur, which comes across as like hard-boiled egg sulfur.
Right.
Catalytic converter sulfur. So, and I know
I always just thought of it as like how much of it there is. You know, this is almost like implied.
Well, it's two different compounds, and I should know these, but I forget them off the top of my head. So,
So, question for, I guess, the BJCP judges. So, you know, obviously, being with the Helles, it's a lighter, drier beer than the Helles Bock would be, where sulfur is, you know, and there are acceptable levels of sulfur in the Helles. Are there sulfur levels? Is there an acceptable sulfur level in the Maibock as well? Or since it's a Bock, it's more malty, more toasty, that sulfur yeast character isn't appropriate?
I think that in most of the style, if you're going by the guidelines, I mean, most of the style guidelines don't mention sulfur specifically. So it's more of a kind of a practice, I guess, among judges, that in lagers generally, if you get an initial whiff of sulfur and like Kyle was saying, it dissipates quickly, and you know it's not a catalytic converter sort of thing, like you were saying. If it goes away and it's pleasant, you know, you don't detract from that, because it is a byproduct of the
It's a waft of sulfur, not a fart.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
All right, shall we go on to the Dunkels Bock?
I guess I need extra.
So Dunkels Bock, so we're tasting this because we're kind of coming to the Helles Bock from the other direction now. Instead of going from the smaller to the larger, where a Helles Bock is a Helles brewed up to Bock strength, this is a Bock. But it's different than a Helles Bock in a couple of different ways. As it's not going to, a Helles Bock is not going to have the caramel that this might have. It's not going to have the dark fruit that you might get from some of the grains. But it's going to have similar strength. It's going to have a similar kind of emphasis on malt and the richness of the malt. Now, Dunkel Bock is often going to have that malt flavor is often going to have more Maillard kind of related malt flavors to it than a Helles Bock will. Although a Helles Bock can have some of those complex flavors, but the Dunkels Bock is usually going to have more of that. But in other ways, but they're both Bocks. They're going to have some. They're both malt forward, relatively well attenuated Bocks. So, cheers.
And Jim, just for to clarify, that we're doing the Lifesblood, the Old Irving now. Is that right?
The Old Irving, right? So, anyone want to talk about the aroma? Hey, Carrie, unmute yourself. Tell us what you smelled in it.
I smell Kari, by the way, but
Kari.
I smell like it's obviously roastier, a little bit of chocolate. I get like kind of like prunes or plums.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Chris?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
You're still muted, Chris.
I'm loving this beer.
You guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I think I'm probably getting the same things as Kari.
Melted out.
Yeah, that was pretty
Definitely getting like the darker graininess.
A lot more bitterness.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm getting, at least not on the nose, I'm getting a lot of the sweeter maltiness. That's just me.
Staying on the aroma for a little bit is, what do folks think about the roast aroma?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Now, one of the things we do when we're tasting, I didn't mention this earlier, is, in addition to the characteristics, we also try and talk about the intensity of those characteristics. And so this roast is pretty elevated for this style.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get a lot of
Like a stout to me. Like if you didn't tell me this was a lager just off the bat and you made me smell it, I would say it would be a stout. If I had a blindfold on.
Yeah,
I thought exact same. It's like an entry level light stout almost, like I thought.
Yeah, I'd go more porter than stout or Maibock.
I guess that I could see that too, but that was just first thing that came to my mind.
Yep.
a lot of chocolate for sure on the aroma and flavor on the roast.
Yep. There's for the style, generally you're trying to avoid roastiness. I don't remember exactly what the guidelines say. I'd have to.
It should be toasty.
I posted them in the chat, but it's definitely more. It doesn't really mention it too much in the flavor, or it doesn't mention it too much in the aroma. It does in the flavor, but I think it's definitely elevated for what it should be for the style.
It should be. It's some Dunkels Bocks don't have any roast perception of roast at all,
right?
And you can make it without any roasted, like roast barley or anything like that.
Yeah, it's definitely like I mean, it's a very clean beer, but it definitely does fall more on that. Like, I wouldn't go so far as a porter or stout personally. I'd go more into like that brown ale category.
Yep.
I'd say it's like a really clean brown ale, because that's just like what Dave was saying, is like it's chocolate. Like the roast is there and you can identify that as roast, but it's like it's that milk chocolate kind of Easter bunny type roast.
Yeah, it's got a surprisingly crisp finish, even more so almost than the Helles.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think it's like a little bit drier than the Dovetail.
Yeah,
They still have like
that crispness or that finish, that appearance of crispness. I'm wondering about so I think it may be related to something else. So what do folks think about the balance of this beer, and thinking about it in terms of the balance in terms of malt versus bitterness, not hop flavor, but bitterness?
I think it's a little, I'm actually surprised by the bitterness of it.
Yeah. Now, one of the things you'll notice in the guidelines, and I don't want to preempt Kyle and Jeff here, but both of the Bocks, the Helles Bock and the Dunkels Bock, they require more bitterness, but that's because there's a lot more malt, right? And so the intensity of the bitterness should be higher, but the balance should still be malty, right?
Because there's more malt, or because there's more malt sweetness?
Well, you want enough hop, you want enough bitterness to support the malt, not necessarily to keep up with it.
Right. It's kind of the reverse of an American IPA, where we think of the malt supporting the bitterness. This is the bitterness in some way supporting the malt, I suppose. But to me, I kind of think that the balance on this is a little off. I mean, I think this is a pretty balanced beer, and it should be a little more malt forward. So whether that's because the malt isn't quite high enough, or the bitterness is too high, I don't know. But
it's getting a lot sweeter as it warms up. It tasted, I got that roasty bitterness initially, but as it's warming up, it has a really nice sweetness. I enjoy it, though I like a little edge on the roast. So what would be a a better way to go with the specialty grains for toastiness as opposed to going over the line on roastiness?
Well, for a Dunkels Bock, you usually are relying a lot on those toast, those toasty flavors. So you're talking about, you can't be talking about like Vienna and Munich. A little bit of caramel malt can be good. I don't know if people use biscuit in a Bock or not. I never have.
I don't think so.
Yeah, but Vienna, Munich, caramels.
Yeah, you really shouldn't be using roasted grains. I mean, you can for coloring, but there shouldn't be any roasted grains used for character.
Right.
Right. I think everything I've seen was like a 3% like high end for any of those type of grains from any research I've looked at.
Mm-hmm.
I think some pale chocolate could be nice in this style, but I don't know. You get more of a toast off of pale chocolate versus that, more roasty side of the dark spectrum.
Shadow says hi. Yeah, well, I enjoy this beer. I think it's the purpose of you having this kind of help us circle around the Helles Bock style. This is a little different. Circling around this as a style, I would call this like an American Bock. It's got that kind of American character, of the with the bitterness and just a more balanced, prominent role for the hops. But
I'd agree with that statement, Jim, that this definitely has a very American influence. And I noticed with a lot of American breweries that do German style beers, that hop influence still tends to bleed into their ventures into that style. Not all of them. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but there I've certainly encountered some, and I'd say this falls into that category.
Coming back to what someone said just before, Jim, can you just by the taste, by the smell, say it's a lager 100%?
I think this has lager character to it. I mean, I think the fermentation seems clean, and yeah, I don't know what other folks think.
Well, I mean, Jim, just to add on to what Michael was saying, I mean, if you were to drink this blindfolded, would you know that it was a lager? Or I mean,
I think so. I mean, but
I mean,
there's some pretty clean ales out there sometimes too.
Right.
So,
I mean,
I would, whether I would say this is a lager or an ale, I think I would describe it as there's, I'm not sure I'm picking up any esters. There may be a slight, like a pear kind of thing, maybe, but it's very low.
Right.
And I'm not getting any phenols, any spice out of it.
I can totally tell the difference. And recently I made a mistake and I was brewing a dark Cascadian ale and I pitched lager yeast. And I could tell through the whole fermentation process the differences. And the beer just ultimately didn't have the bite of an ale. The lager version of a dark Cascadian was just so smooth. And I was actually I appreciated the malt bill more. Whereas like the ale version of the exact same recipe just finished in a whole different way. And and I actually, it was sort of like a tropical lager. I didn't put it in the fridge. I thought I was making an ale the whole time.
Right.
But there was definite differences between SO5 and S23.
Fermented at 65. Right.
I mean, so Jim, I mean, if you were to drink this blindfolded and we told you that it was a tropical stout, how close do you think you got as a tropical stout?
Oh,
It's not even.
I don't think it's
way too
close.
thin to be a tropical stout.
Yeah.
Say that again, Kyle.
I said it's way too thin and it's not nearly as fruity to be a tropical stout.
Yeah.
I think the hopping is a giveaway too. It's not, I mean, if you're doing a porter or something, that would be the ale version of this. These taste to me like more subdued, old European noble hops. It doesn't have any kind of flavor that's coming through with the hopping. It's sort of that inky Germanic flavor that's in there too. So I do think you can tell the difference between this and the ale cousin we have.
Yeah. As this warms up for me, as I taste it, drink more of it, to me, the bitter, I go back to the bitterness. I think, it's enjoyable. I like it. I like bitter beers. I think the balance is off on this for the style.
And I also know that there's like it's not like a linear curve, but like, because once you start getting darker, like you can go from zero dark to very dark very quickly. But even with this one, like going back to that stout thing, is it's like, even though it looks very dark when you look at it, if you hold a light up to it, and this is why you'll see, if you go to a competition, you see lots of judges that take a flashlight and they'll carry a flashlight around with them and then hold that up to them. Because this wouldn't be like a black beer as a stout would be. This is still more of that brown color.
Yeah. And mine
You're
even
a whole
isn't.
Old Dark 30 thing, but it's not a lager in colors either.
All right. Anything else about this beer? So
we have someone. Chris just posted the list of grains. Can you reflect on these grains and say which ones you would see being not on style, if any?
So that was me. I don't know what the Bohemian Dark is, and I don't know if Dave might know that on the commercial scale. But it does say it has Carafa Special in it. And so Carafa Special is a roasted grain, but it is dehusked. And a lot of that husk material is what leads to bitterness when you use like roasted barley or black patent or something like that. So it's like a dark malt that isn't super bitter, but it still will lead to some bitterness, I find. So that's what I said, that the Carafa in there seems like a touch out of place, but I'm not really one to criticize.
Creeping into Dunkel territory.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. I'm not sure. I'm not very familiar with Bohemian dark malt per se, if that's describing like subcategories or if that's the actual name of the malt itself.
and I was wondering if it's like a dark Munich.
Yeah,
Does
probably.
appear to be, Chris posted the BSG stats on it, and it's a 5 to 8 Lovabond, which would put it probably solidly in a dark Munich.
Yep.
I mean the Wireman dark Munich. I think the Wireman dark Munich is maybe 12 to 14 Lovabond, so maybe a little bit lighter, but darker than obviously your Pilsner malt, your pale malt, your Maris Otter.
But so to kind of get us back to this, how any of this relates to the Helles Bock. So I think for the Helles, the Dovetail, that was pretty clear. I mean, those sorts of flavors just amplified, ramped up, and then with the ABV ramped up also. That's the relationship. With this with the Dunkels, this particular Dunkels Bock to a Helles Bock, it's a little less clear to me. I mean, there's, I think a Helles Bock is going to have less bitterness, or it's going to be more malt forward than this example is. It's going to not have the roast. There's not a lot of dark fruit in this, but a little bit, which is probably from the grain, not from the fermentation. But it is going to have the clean fermentation that this does. It is going to have the same approximate strength. Yeah. Anything else before we move on to talking about what we actually came here to talk about, the Helles Bock?
Yeah, Jim, this is the only example of the 3 that I have, so I guess I have to go with this one.
Enjoy. All right, Jeff, do you want to tell us about the Helles Bock?
Yeah. So Helles Bock or Maibock, you can go either way. So basically, these beers came around in like the later 1800s. Bocks before that, the ones made in Munich at least, were more like what we're drinking from Old Irving. They were dark because that's what people use. They didn't have pale kilned malt. They had dark malts. So your original Bocks, at least the Munich ones, would have been like the Old Irving one made with lager yeast. Because the Bocks before that, the original Bocks were actually made with ale yeast and also had wheat in them because of the part of Germany they were from. That town was located in a valley where wheat, barley, and hops were all grown. So that's kind of how they had the access to all the ingredients, and they were really able to it was cheap for them to make, and they were able to focus on the ingredients. So Maibock, at the time that Maibock came out, it kind of Pilsners came first, and then Maibock. Basically what happened was the technology from to kiln pale malts made its way from England to Germany. And actually it was a German person who brought it over, but he did it in Czechoslovakia, which is where Pilsner Urquell came from. That was like the first one. So once they figured out how to do that, they decided another thing happened too. A lot of things are going on here to bring you these pale beers. So people figured out how to kiln pale malts. Once they did that, it was expensive because, you had to change your setup and everything. But once they started using pale malts, they realized that you could use less malt. So it became more practical to use pale malts and add like your black patents or something for coloring. Or in the case of Bocks, they would just do a bunch of decoctions with, barley and Munich malts. Maybe Munich malts, and they would throw in, it would be brown too, because that's how they kilned. So once Pilsners came out, and they kind of got popular everywhere else but Germany first, because Germans, particularly in Bavaria, were very stuck to their brown beer. That was like tradition, and like the lighter beers were not considered traditional beers. Though they did make them to a certain extent, they just weren't like super popular. And Hofbrau claims that they're the first ones to do a Maibock, which could be true because they were owned by the royal family at the time, so they had the means to convert to pale malts and make these beers. But it was pretty much, I don't know if they weren't necessarily made for like a May festival. What happened was you would make these in the wintertime and you would lager them, but they weren't clean, right? Like they didn't have the cleanings, they weren't like sanitized and clean. So stuff was infected, but it was lagered, so it wasn't like the infections weren't kicking in. So you kind of had to drink these fast, right? So once it started warming up, they knew from experience that all their other beers were brown and sour. So unless they drank them fresh, and then they weren't sour. So kind of lagering season was over. There were festivals in May. Then the other thing that happened to kind of push this along was the invention, like the methods of making glass clear and like mass producing clear glass for drinking out of also kind of happened at the same time that kilning of pale malts happened. And when people started drinking these in the spring, and they kind of looked at their beer, which used to be brown, and if it was drank from a glass, the glass wasn't clear. Otherwise you were like drinking like out of your shoe or like a wooden cup with like tar on the inside. So now you got like a clear, divoted glass in the spring, it's sunny out and your beer's golden. You could see right through it, and that kind of also built on the popularity of these Das Boot, yeah. So it was like around the mid to late 1800s when these were made. And that's pretty much, there's not like a huge history with Maibock. They're fairly new though. And I hate to contradict Jim, but they actually aren't a scaled up Helles. The Helles beer actually came after the Maibock. The Maibock were first, and the Helles beer was like in the early 1900s. And even those took a long time to catch on. I think Spaten actually made the first Munich Helles. And it wasn't necessarily imitation of Bock. There are kind of two separate things happening here.
Right. Yeah,
so
I didn't
so
mean
the Bock was pretty.
I didn't mean historically. I meant kind of style wise.
Yeah. So yeah. So these what else was I going to say about these? Yeah, so they were pretty much just a means to make a lighter colored Bock than what was being produced at the time. And it just kind of stuck on and became a tradition to have these at May festivals, which is why they were called Maibocks. The other thing that I found out while I was doing this research, kind of off the track, was that Doppelbocks actually aren't Bocks. I learned they were actually independent of Bocks, but they were like really sweet because the monks used them as a liquid diet, so they had more sugar content. They weren't, brought down to a really low final gravity. But when they became available to the public in the late 1700s, the public said, "Oh, it's like a Bock but stronger. It's a double Bock." So it was more of like a public opinion type of name than actually being a Bock brewed to double strength. So, but, yeah. So that's the history of Maibocks. It did catch on. Shiner Bock isn't a Maibock. They say they're a Maibock, but they're not. I don't know how much Shiner Bock I don't think it's the same as it was before Prohibition. I'm actually pretty certain it isn't. People do play around with this style around the world. They'll use ale yeast. I think even in Germany, some breweries will use the 1007 yeast to make it that you use for like Kolsch and alt beers. Rogue Dead Guy Ale is a Maibock made with American yeast, actually. So if you kind of want to see the difference, that'd be a good one to get just to try with your Maibock that you brew, or Old Irving's, or not Old Irving's. You're right there. With On Tour's Maibock, go buy another one of theirs and compare it with Rogue Dead Guys to see the difference between the two different kinds of yeast in a Maibock.
And as we're doing a bit of history, it may be worth noting that Bock doesn't mean strong in German. It just comes from the name of the place, basically, where it was first brewed.
Yes.
Bock is a city, or?
Einbeck was the original city, but the way it was pronounced in Munich, when they started making them in Munich, it sounded like Bock.
Interesting.
Which is also the name it's the word for goats, which is why you'll see a goat on a lot of labels for Bock.
Yeah, I speak Old German, and that's what I always thought it came from.
Yeah, and we have Buck. Bucktown was a reference to goats.
Yeah, but it's just the way they pronounced the name of the town sounded like Bock, so they put goats, and it kind of became like a nickname for it, I guess.
Well, and there's the historical, and then there's also just kind of what the modern usage is, and these days, the Helles Bock, the Dunkels Bock, the Doppelbock, all are kind of shorthand for stronger versions of German lagers.
Right.
All right. So Kyle, you want to tell us what the BJCP says about this and lead us into tasting?
Sure. So this is one of those that I really like. So I put the link in. I'll drop it again because it might have gotten lost a little bit. So if you go to the BJCP category 4, and this is actually one of those that's really lines up pretty well. So there's 4 beers in this category 4. We had the first one, which is the Munich Helles 4A. And then there's 4B, which is the Fest beer. And I don't, again, want to get too lost in the weeds here, but if you go to Munich now and go to Oktoberfest, the end of September, and go to one of their tents and you get a beer, chances are you're not getting an Oktoberfest like we know that as in America. What you're getting is a Fest beer. It's going to be paler than what we're used to at the Oktoberfest. And then that's basically it. A little bit drier. And then the 4C in this category is what we're drinking with this Helles Bock. But the reason why I really like how the BJCP has outlined this here, as compared to some other categories and stuff, is that all of these are really, really similar. And that's also the reason why we drank the Helles Bock, or the Helles first, is I always think about them, and it could be a little bit disingenuous on my part, but I don't think it's too wrong, is that each one kind of builds off each other. So we're the Helles, and even I saw on this Dovetail one, where it's 4.4% alcohol. So it's kind of like this pale malty lager, and that's literally what the category, the overarching category description is. And it's, like we said, it's, we can drink a lot of it, things like that. And then you got the middle one, which is that Festbier I just described, which kind of steps it up a little bit. So it's going to be the same really type of flavor profile with just dominant malt. There's going to be a little bit of that noble hops, and the noble hops come off as that earthy, floral, little bit spicy type of thing on your palate. And then you go up to the 4C with the Helles Bock or the Maibock, which is just taking that up even a little bit. And I think they've even done a really good job with, if you go down at the bottom with the vital statistics, how each one of them is. So each one kind of is a little bit more than the other one. So like with the Helles Bock, we're looking that the bitterness goes up a little bit to balance that malt character. The color goes up a little bit. And then obviously that starting gravity goes up. So that's what, when I think Jeff was talking about, when you go to Bock strength, even though that's, the name of that city or whatever, like it's kind of became this connotation where the Bock is a stronger version of something else. So even if the Maibock came first, or this Helles Bock came first in history, now it has this name where it's basically a stronger version of this Helles. And then with that Festbier, it kind of got wedged between them. But just stepping through the guidelines. So like it says, it's a relatively pale, malty German lager beer with a nicely attenuated finish that enhances drinkability. And then the hop character is generally more apparent than in other Bocks, which I agree with this example. And then, like Jim pointed out, starting this evening off with just going by the BJCP rubric, this is kind of how we go through things when we judge the beer. So, we can basically, I think most of the judges go and do the appearance and the aroma at the same time, because this is always the trick I like to point out, is that you have your beer. Obviously, when you're doing a judging, I'm not pulling a half-liter pint of it or whatever, but you're in your sample cup, and then either one of the good things is if you have one of these hard coasters at home, then you can put it over the top, and that basically traps the aroma. And so I put that over the top, and then I can look at the beer and I can scribble down my thoughts on the score sheet with how that beer looks, while not having any of that aroma dissipate. So I do the appearance first, and then I go to the aroma. On the thing here on the website, the appearance comes first, but on the score sheet, it's actually like the second one. So that's why I do that. But then on the aroma, we're getting mostly a strong malty sweetness. And then this goes back to, is it the sweetness from, possibly residual sugars from the fermentation character, or sweetness from that malt. Moderately low to no hop aroma. And then that hop, because it's this German style. So whenever you think about the German styles or have a German style in front of you, even if it's an American version of a German style, like we're drinking tonight, it should be that noble hop character, which again is that spicy, floral, earthy kind of character. And for anybody that doesn't know out there, so there's the 4 noble hop varieties, which are Hallertauer, Tettnang, Spalt, and I believe those 3 are all German derived. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure Hallertauer and Tettnang are, unsure of the Spalt. And then there's Satz, which is Czech. So those hops grown in those regions are going to elicit those characteristics. And then we get into the flavor, and that should really parallel what you're smelling. So it's going to be dominant malt, but it shouldn't be cloying. So that's kind of what that last sentence says. So well attenuated, even if it finishes up where in those vital statistics, so it can have a final gravity of 1018. And it should also be pointed out that when judges judge beer, like we don't know any of the statistics of the beer, but we can get kind of a good idea of where you are with them, with how it tastes and how it smells. So you can have a 1018 beer, but it can still, if everything else is done well, it can still finish not dry, but it can still finish so that it's not cloying on the palate. And that was going back to something I mentioned before, where it's just kind of very sticky on your palate. It does talk about that it can have that light DMS flavor. That DMS is kind of can be that canned corn, creamed corn, a little vegetal. I'm not getting any of this with this example right here. That should never be dominant. Light, I think there is the key word. And then the mouthfeel, I think the mouthfeel is always like really important to the beer. And on the BJCB rubric, it only gets 5 points, which I think can be a little disingenuous for that as well, because how it feels on your palate can have big effects on how you perceive the rest of it. So the carbonation level, the body of it, that can play into that final gravity. And then it can get into that fermentation character, whether it's super hot. So like these beers, even if they're stronger in alcohol, like it should never come across as being hot. So you should never like either taste, smell, or have it on your palate of that hot alcohol or that solvent type thing. Like just think about, smelling vodka or something like that. Like you should never get that perception. Same thing with the like astringency. So I always kind of equate astringency with how it feels like on your cheeks. And if it gets like that like mouth dryness, or if you're like kind of want to pucker up a little bit, that's what I perceive astringency as. So it should not have any of that. This does say a light alcohol, but you never want it to be that strong thing. So that's kind of stepping through those guidelines there.
That was very clear. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Do you want to lead us through the tasting?
Sure. So like I said, like when I get a sample in my glass, the first thing I do is I just, you do it with your hand or a coaster or a piece of paper or something, is I just kind of trap the aroma. And this is like, because I think of everything if I'm filling out a BJCP score sheet. So I do that and I kind of look at it. And like I even said before, if you want to get like super nerdy, you can pull out the flashlight, you can look through it, so then you can get your perception of how the beer looks. So with this one, I'd say it's definitely a very strong like gold color, which falls squarely in the guidelines. And then once I do that, then you just go in big with your nose, and then the easy way to think about it, and this is totally always like just if I'm filling out a score sheet. I don't drink every beer in my entire life like this, but if I'm doing it like this, I always think about the ingredients of beer, which are going to be malt, hops, water, and then the yeast. And then if you can describe every part of that, then at least for the person that you're judging that beer for, you're doing them a good service. So, and then understanding those guidelines. So for a Maibock, I know it's going to be malt dominant. So that's probably where I'm going to focus my entire attention to, is like, what does this malt taste like? And then after that, I'm going to be like, so how do the hops in this beer balance that? Water is a little interesting because you can't really describe the water unless you get those like mineral characteristics on your palate. So Dave can probably talk about that more than I can about what they do for their water. And then the yeast is going to be like the ester and phenolic characters. And so again, that's understanding the guidelines. So for this particular lager example, we shouldn't really be getting any of those. So that's going to be like really different for an ale type beer. So, after I do that, and then I look, and then I smell, and I for this one is totally like, I get that rich malt character. I get a little bit of like caramel sweetness in it. I get a little bit of crackery grain, but definitely the grain and that malt character is in the forefront. And then I go for my brain, I go over and I say, okay, so what can I smell for the hops? And it's not there like totally in the forefront, obviously, because that's all malt, but it can be like a little bit of like earthy floral type of hop character that I'm getting here.
I'm getting a little floral.
grassy,
I'm getting
grassy
a little floral,
bitterness.
a little bit of in the aroma, almost a lavender kind of floral.
Yeah. So then you go in and you taste it, and then I always like to tell people again that don't know, like when you're tasting something, when you're really trying to describe it, there's this thing called, I'll probably butcher the name, but I think it's like retroolfaction. So you or nasal olfaction. So you like kind of breathe in right before you taste the beer. And then you taste it, and then you breathe out.
Right.
And then you find that like a lot of your palate is like different and heightened to pick up some really different characters when you're really looking for them.
I think
so it's a lot different when you're drinking a beer for pleasure, just sitting and watching TV or something, than drinking it and really trying to pick out all the nuances of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that technique you're talking about, what's happening is you're driving those molecules up back into your nasal cavity. And like we said earlier, you've got so much more capability. We have so much more capability with aroma, and the aroma, and you're activating that, and it impacts your ability to taste things, as opposed to only relying on what's in your mouth and on your tongue.
Right. If you actually breathe out of your nose, like swallow it, keep your mouth closed, and breathe out of your nose right after you swallow it. Because that's actually where your flavor receptors are in the back and in your nose.
An interesting side note, I can tell the impurities of a beer from the burp. Off gassy little things that I didn't notice on the flavor, really strong in a burp.
It's really interesting when you drink a lot of smoked beer and then you burp, and then you're like, oh, how was that?
Kyle, can you talk a bit about your expectations when you first tasted it? So you had a good smell and you were expecting some maltiness because that's what you smelled. Were you expecting, for instance, that the beer would be so sweet?
Not particularly. It is, I think it is a little sweet, but it's not like, again, it doesn't fall into that like cloyingly sweet where it's like sticky on my palate sweet. but again, when you go with like the guidelines, you do have to look at those. And with this one, I think it was like 1018 or something like that.
I can't believe it's that high. That's
So it can, when you take that into consideration, you can be like, okay, this can be like a little bit of a sweet beer. So yeah, I mean, I do think it's sweet. I get a little bit of that, like, it's not like a burnt sugar, but I get like a little bit of a toasted sugar when I smell it and when I taste it. It comes across as like pleasant. It's not unpleasant for me. And again, it's like really hard because I haven't had many like examples of that classic German Maibock to really compare this against.
To taste them, I think you'd go the Dovetail was the lightest. Then I think you'd go On Tour, and then you'd go the Old Irving, actually, when I look at percentage, but it's not that order, but to taste, that's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, the Dovetail is 4.4 and this is 7.8.
Yeah, it says a lot to the balance because you'd think the Old Irving was like the highest ABV just from taste, personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, getting back to the sweetness, Kyle, to me, I think this is pretty well attenuated. I mean, I don't know the numbers. I don't know, kind of where it is, but it's got a fuller kind of mouthfeel and that, but to me, this is not, I wouldn't describe this as sweet.
Dave, what's the final gravity on this one?
The final gravity was 2.5 with the OG at about 16 and a half, to give you an idea of.
Yeah, none of us use Play-Doh.
Okay. All right.
I'm putting in the converter.
Take out your converters. Yeah.
So 2.5 is around 1010.
1010.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
1010, huh?
I'm not surprised. I mean, to me, this is I think this is well attenuated.
And that's what I'm saying is that I think I'm not saying it's sweet in a bad way. It's definitely like still very drinkable to me.
Yeah.
But it has that it has more of that malt character and stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
And that goes into that next category of that BJCP rubric where you're going with the mouthfeel.
Yeah.
So I think every single one of us has this from a crowler, where it could be losing probably just a tiny bit of carbonation from where you have it if you're serving it off tap at the brew pub, and that's just how things happen.
I gotta credit the crowler pour. Mine was like to the rim. Very nice job with that.
And that's just a struggle that I think everybody deals with. So
when you brewed this, what was the original starting gravity?
The OG?
Yeah.
So again, we're talking Play-Doh. It was target was 16 and ended up at 16.8.
1065 to
1010.
1010.
Hey,
Kyle.
Kyle, one thing you haven't mentioned yet is your impression or how this might impact the alcohol on this.
I get 0 alcohol from this one.
Really? So in the aroma, so when I first smelled it, now it's not hot, it's not unpleasant, but I was.
And maybe that's how I perceive alcohol, is if it's hot or unpleasant.
Right. I'm getting significant alcohol in the aroma and in the flavor, but it's and not just the warming alcohol that you kind of get, afterwards, but the actual flavor of alcohol. But again, not fusel.
It does end up at 7.75 for the ABV.
Yeah.
So my very anecdotal experience as I lived 3 years in Germany and having a box pretty much every week, which is not something healthy. That is spot on for Bock. In particular, for what Jim was saying in terms of perceived alcohol, it is Yeah, it's slightly boozy without being fusional.
Yeah.
It is very sweet without being cloying. It hits all the marks. It is very, very on style from my experience. Congratulations on that.
Cool. Thank you, Mike.
I have a question for Dave. So if it did finish at 2.5 Plato, I mean, it's not particularly sweet in terms of residual sugar here. I mean, that is drier than I would sort of expect. So you must get a lot of the sweet character from it from your grain bill.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that 100%.
Would you mind talking about that?
So we're distracted by Reed right now.
Yeah, you want to talk about the grain bill?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear sort of what you went with, if you.
Just holding that thought for a moment.
Okay.
So Kyle, is there anything else about kind of tasting this that you want to go over before?
No, the other
this particular example was brewed.
Sure. I mean, just I think as I touched on briefly is then the next category where I said like I don't think it gets the credit it deserves, but the part of the mouthfeel, and that's like how the beer is carbonated and delivered basically to your palate. And I think, like I said, this is done pretty well. Might just be a tiny bit low, but I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that it's probably done correctly at the brew pub, and then they got to put it in a crowler.
Right.
Generally, every time that you're going off the tap into a package, you're losing like a little bit because you're doing that at room temp, and there's just a little bit of loss there. But it's carbonated. It's not flat. Stuff like that is good. So, and this goes on to my whole other thing that I've talked about ad nauseum with the brew club, with when you're delivering a beer for a competition, to have it carbonated correctly, it goes a long way. So, but I think this is done pretty well.
What's the head retention on your glasses? I have none, but maybe that my glass is dirty.
Yeah, it's not high, but
so you see, Dave has a better one. It may well be because he's at the breweries.
Yeah, but I poured it from the crowler, so I'm experiencing the same as you all.
He's telling you guys gotta wash your glasses a little better.
And it's also like as the alcohol goes up, so as you start reaching, I think it's like anything over 5%, you start losing some of that head because the alcohol content is not good for that head retention.
Sure.
And this is probably like one of my life goals is this is totally not a Belgian style, and I totally realize that, but like, how does Duvel like get an 8% beer that has like this head that's like ridiculous?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Lots of foam positive process.
Yeah.
Well, kind of thinking about this in terms of kind of the overall impression of this, compared to other, I can't remember having a U.S. brewed Maibock or Helles Bock before. Maybe I have, I just don't remember it. But compared to the German ones I've had, I think this compares really well. It's got all the components you're looking for. I mean, you're certainly not going to drink this by the pint, but it's got that complex malt, right? Right. Even though they sell it by the 2-pint growlers, it's got that complexity in the malt. The balance is right. There is, you perceive some bitterness, but it is all about the malt. It's clean. Like I said, I get a significant amount of alcohol on it, but it's not unpleasant alcohol. It's good. So
yeah, could you talk about the hopping? Like what hops do you use?
Sure. So
tell us about the grain bill too, like Alex.
I figure I'll just kind of do like a quick kind of recipe rundown that might answer a lot of the questions popping up or rolling through people's heads right now. Can everybody hear me okay? I am in a brewery with
Yeah.
pumps and exhaust fans on and stuff. Okay, so the Maibock. Let's start with the grain bill. We got some Pilsner. We got some Munich 1. We got some rye. We got some melanoidin, which I was talking to Jim at the brewery a little bit earlier. We don't do decoction, any of that type of deal. So the melanoidin sort of, I think, kind of helps you cheat through that. We also have some Cara Amber, which is like a Cara Pills. We usually throw that in for head retention, actually, but it's cool that there's like an amber twist on that. And then we have some acidulated. So
now the rye is not very traditional, is it?
Yeah, no, I suppose not. You know, I think it plays well though with the Munich and the melanoidin and the Cara. You know, it's not huge, but it's not subtle either. You know what I mean? So it's in
I wonder
there.
if that could be playing into some of Jim's perception of the alcohol too.
Sure.
That rye kind of associates with
For sure.
the alcohol.
And as far as the perceived sweetness, which I totally agree with it, it's a tad sweet. You know, I could see somebody from Germany being like, oh, these Americans, you know, sweetened it up a little, but it's not a sugary, unattenuated sweetness. It's like a caramely, malty sweetness. So I dig that a lot. And to me, it's like a very candy, bready beer that does sort of leave a stickiness to lick off your lips. But again, I don't know. I personally dig that a lot, actually. So that's the grain. It's all Wireman, by the way, too. Wireman malt. I can move on if there's no other grain bill particularly.
Well, just on the sweetness aspect, it's like it tastes delicious and
Sure.
it looks the beautiful part. My only complaint about it is that I don't think I could drink a lot of it.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, if it was a little
I agree.
drier,
Yeah.
I could drink more of it.
No, for sure. It does kind of fill you up quick with that sweet liquid bread, right?
And I don't think the goal is to have a lot of it.
No,
even in the style.
I was talking to Mark about this, Mark Legenza, owner, brewer, and you know, he mentioned like you're really not supposed to have huge pours of it. We're one of those breweries that offers like a lot of different ounce glass pours, which is cool. So this beer doesn't really move through our inventory super fast in the sense that it's kind of a tap room hero. It's not like a blast out to the market. And a lot of people will come in and have, you know, maybe a 4 to 10 ounce pour tops and say, wow, that was really good, but that's it for the night. So we're not like crushing through kegs of it. People aren't chugging it by the pint. You know what I mean? It's definitely a smaller pour beer, I would say, for most folks, which is okay. You know what I mean?
Same thing in Germany. You never find these beers in pint formats. They're always in small
Yeah.
bottle.
That's interesting.
Good thing we all got crowlers.
Yeah, I was like, hey, we poured a couple pre-filled crowlers because I knew y'all were coming here and there yesterday, today, or whatever. So there was like 2 left over. And I figured, well, I might as well just grab a crowler for this instead of, I didn't pour it from the draft, you know, like I wanted to experience it how you guys are saying. And I agree, maybe the carb's a little low, but now I'm sitting here thinking, man, I got to drink this whole thing now, you know. I'll probably share it with the bartender ladies after closing or something, but it is a rough beer to drink a ton of unless you're like super into that style and you just love it or something.
It's delicious.
It's also
well done.
The rest of us are already home, Dave. So you know,
yeah, right.
You're in trouble.
I just finished.
Yeah, Sean, I hear you about the sweetness. I don't think it's sweet. I think that's malt.
Yeah, it is. It's malt sweetness for sure.
And I am not surprised that the numbers that Dave told us about the attenuation. To me, it tastes well attenuated, and it's something as a brewer, you know, I've been challenged with for years, you know, about you know that difference between just those few final points of attenuation, you know, and you know, and for big beers like this is really nice. So,
right on.
While with the malts, what's the the mash schedule. Maybe you wanted to talk about that later, but that I think it's important to understand how the mouthfeel plays out.
Say again? I didn't quite catch that.
The mash schedule.
Yeah, tell us about the mashing for this.
Is it like a stepped mash or is it just like a single infusion?
Single, so we do, our strike and then we follow up with a sparge. It's nothing crazy. There's no decoction, no crazy rest. It's basically brewed like we brew our other lagers. We mash in. I'm looking at our mash volume here. We did a 15-barrel turn, 380 gallons of water, and then we sparge with 460 gallons. So you have way more water coming through on the sparge end. But yeah, it's like a one-time infusion followed up by the sparge on the
What temp did you guys mash in at?
The temperature, let me take a look, was 145.
Hey, Dave, was your mash stepped or was it like 145 all day?
145 all day, but we do our sparges pretty hot. So the sparge was probably hotter.
And what was the length of boil on that?
90 minutes.
90-minute boil. Because you were thinking like of DMS as a DMS precaution?
We do a lot of 90-minute boils. That's just kind of how we roll over here.
For the Maillard.
Sorry, say again?
For the Maillard.
Reaction.
Right.
A little caramelization.
Yeah.
Right. That's definitely going to give more depth to the malt.
Yeah, I like sort of simmering it down a little further and like burning a barrel off or something, you know what I mean, to kind of get that real reduction going. But again, it's not like any crazy decoction stuff or yeah.
What was the mash pH like?
That I don't actually have that info offhand, unfortunately.
Anything on the water by chance?
Yeah, so let's talk about the water. So we don't do a lot. This is actually kind of a more mild water treatment situation, in terms of like mimicking German water and Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan's pretty good. I tell people all the time, like, we're kind of spoiled with our water in Chicago. I'm looking at our notes we have calcium chloride, 200 grams, calcium sulfite, 125 grams. Again, that's a 15-barrel turn. Phosphoric acid's 50 milliliters. So that's a little on the lower side for us. In other words, we didn't do a whole lot to the water itself.
And you're just using filtered Chicago water and then adding that? Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. So yeah, that pretty much covers the grain grist, the water. We talked a little bit about gravities. I'm just kind of looking at my brew sheet, trying to give you guys the rundown, and then we can follow up with whatever other questions. Hop wise, there's a little bit of Columbus on the bittering 90 minutes edition. And then let's see, Kyle was talking about German noble hops earlier, and he nailed it with the 4 categories. We do check Saz on that on the end, just a little 10-minute, guys, sort of towards the end of boil. And that's it. So, you're correct that it's not a very crazy hop forward bitter type of beer because it's all about the malt. You know what I mean? So we do, it's basically Columbus in the beginning, check Saz at the end. Nothing in the whirlpool, nothing dry hopped. That's it.
What about fermentation? What are you guys like a single, house yeast, or do you use different yeasts?
Yeah, let's talk about the yeast a little bit. So what we do use is the BSI Amdex yeast, which likes to behave well at temp ranges of about 50 degrees to 54 degrees. Typically, when we knock out here with our lager yeast, we're coming out at about 53 degrees is what we're really trying to like nail through our heat exchanger into the tank. And then we'll let it free rise to 54 degrees overnight. And then we come in, we like to see it getting going a little bit on primary, and then we'll bump it up like 1 degree and let it just kind of hang out and do its thing. And then Mark likes doing this deal where right about in the middle. Double check this on the brew sheet. Yeah, right about in the middle of the gravity attenuation for the D-rest, he'll bring it up to 60 degrees. So really let that yeast warm up again and push all that out. And then we'll start steeping it down. And we don't just crash it and let it go. It's that slow, like 4 degree a day steep down. So we know it's a boozy beer, but we do try to avoid a lot of those like hot phenolic characters by doing these like slow gradual steeps on our lager yeast versus just crashing it in the 50s and letting it do its thing or whatever. So I dig that. I'm looking at the sheet right now. It looks like, yeah, they came out at like 52 and then we let it come up to 54, raised it to 55, and then right at about, looks like 3-4 Plato, we brought it up to 60 for the D-rest. And then again, we started crashing it. So start to finish, like that whole lager, crashing, start to finish, how long does this beer take to ferment? 4 weeks. A lot of people are like, oh, lagers, 6, 8, whatever, but you can pull this off in 4. Our carb was at 256, which, yeah, the crowler fills. I see what you're saying. Now that I'm looking at my glass, it's a little like rough on the carb and head retention. And yeah, I think that covers pretty. Oh, let me talk a little more about the yeast actually. So I mentioned temp range 50, 54. Attenuation, BSI index yeast, according to their website, was 72 to 74%, which is pretty ripping. The flocculation, they categorize as medium, but honestly, I think it flocks out a lot better than most lagers, which probably explains why we can push it in 4. And then Jeff, thank you for the history of the yeast and Maibock stuff you were talking about earlier. I read some notes earlier about that particular yeast strand. The index comes from the famous brewery in Hersching, which is a monastery brewery in Germany, ran by monks, that whole deal. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking beer. I've had it in the tap room,
Sure.
where it's got more head on it than this. But I mean, my example is I would call this brilliantly clear. I mean, it's really nice.
I think the clarity is pretty good. We use biofine. We don't filter. We don't have a centrifuge. There's no filter press, but it's not just like about cold crash either. So I love biofine personally for these size breweries. I don't think. Well, first of all, we don't have room in here for a centrifuge or filter press. It's pretty tight space. But biofine is an amazing product overall for, just throw it in the fermenter, cold crash it, and it always just gives me that amazing. I just racked and kegged some beers today, 2 days after biofining, just looking rocking in the site class.
Do you pitch the biofine like at like fermentation temps, or wait till you lager it?
No, we wait till it's cooler.
Is the biofine coming in the bright tank?
The biofine goes in the fermenter, and so we'll do that at like sometimes like the 40s or even 50 degrees, but then we'll crash it down to 32 biofine. That happens in the fermenter, and then we transfer to the bright tank, carbonate it, and then move it into serving tanks.
On your yeast, is all your yeast first generation, or are you going generations out?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the beer and the yeast strain. So like with ale yeast, a lot of times we will try to turn a couple generations at least if we can and the timing works out. But for this particular beer, it was a one and done. We used this yeast and that was it. And I talked to Mark about that, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to make another beer with this yeast or whatever? But it's just a really particularized yeast for this beer and this style. And we make it so rarely that it just kind of ends up being a one and done.
We could all got dumps for our brews.
Yeah,
you guys got to come over next time and grab. You got to catch it at that right time. Yeah, I know. I always feel terrible about like wasting yeast on like a a one generation thing, but sometimes with different
You have our-
styles going
you
on,
have
it
our
happens.
email,
you know?
right? We'll come over.
All
Just
right,
send
I'm
us
gonna
an
put that in
email.
my notes for sure. And then obviously, I think it's worth mentioning, everybody probably already knows, 2017 Golden Award GABF for the Bock category. They also took home the silver that year for our Spectre Ale, which is kind of in a similar range of what we're discussing today. But that's what brought a lot of people's attention to this brewery and that beer. But it's not like a beer that sells and crushes. It's the weird thing. Like I said, it's like everyone knows us for winning that medal and having this beer, but I don't see it flying. You know what I mean? And I don't have a problem with that. It's just, I think it's more about what we were talking about earlier, the drinkability of it. It's like you have like 8 ounces and you're all set for the next, till like a year. You know what I mean?
Well, people want all your hazy IPAs and for you to throw a whole bunch of stuff into your stouts. So
Right.
Well, if as a brewery, you get a tap, at a bar or restaurant, and it's this beer as opposed to one of your IPAs, you're not going to go through this as much. That account is not going to sell as much of this just because of what it is. It's only beer geeks like us who are like, this is fantastic.
Right.
Hey, Dave, maybe you mentioned this. Is this a beer you make year round, or do you
No.
just do it? Okay.
So it's typically, we usually hit the tanks in like February, March to try to have it ready at least for the first week of May. A lot of people associated with like Lent and seasonal stuff like that. I mean, we do have it year round because we make it and nobody drinks it, and then we just have it forever. But we don't like keep brewing it all year on purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a once a year brew kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're saying this is the one that won the medals? This exact beer, the same recipe, everything?
Yes. Yeah.
You guys haven't tweaked it year after year?
Not that I'm aware of.
Wins a medal, you go with it.
Win a
right?
medal, you don't tweak
yeah.
it. Yeah.
I can't take credit for any of this. This is Mark Lagenza made this recipe. He's the owner operator here. And I just kind of swung in after the medals were won and said, hey, I work here now. Let's get started. So, but yeah.
Speaking of which, Dave, so you were at tell us a little bit about your brewing history. Were you ever a home brewer? I know you brewed at Lagunitas before coming to On Tour.
Right, that's correct. So, yeah, it's kind of weird. My history is sort of strange in the sense that I was not a like huge home brewer before becoming a professional brewer. I had a lot of like home brewer buddies, and I loved drinking beer and I loved craft beer, and like got kind of really into it in college, and like I was excited about trying different beers and everything. And so I would go over to like homebrew buddies' house and kind of just like be there when they were brewing and drinking, but I wasn't really like all that involved or understanding. It was just kind of like, oh, cool, you guys are mashing in, and now you have wort, and that ferments, and all right, cool, let's drink more. But I was like a musician / floating around at random factory jobs for a while. I got out of school with a sociology degree in 2008, which was just in time for the economy to take a dive and there to not be a lot of great jobs, and a lot of the funding was getting pulled out in that field. So I was just kind of out there playing music, working factory jobs, and I came across a Craigslist ad to work on a can line at a craft brewery in Chicago, which was Finch Beer Company. So I worked there from 2014 to 2015, started on the can line, started getting friendly with the brewers, talking more about recipes and actual brewing procedures, and became the assistant brewer over there, advanced into a shift brewing role. And then I was out in the East Coast for a while. I worked at a brew pub in New Jersey called Harvest Moon in New Brunswick. If any Rutgers people, I don't know, it's like right on campus there. That was like 2016, 2017. I was there about a year and a half, brewing with head brewer Kyle McDonald, really nice guy. And then I came back to Chicago and got a job at Lagunitas from 2018 to 2020. So I was there about 2.5 years. My Lagunitas experience was mostly cold side manufacturing operations. I did a lot of, I ran the centrifuge, the big filter press. If anyone's ever been there and done the tour, you walk into that filtration area, it's huge filter press and centrifuge. That was kind of my main thing. And then I would jump in and do a lot of, I would do dry hopping, yeast dumps and things like that, but I wasn't so much on the hot side wort production end over there. And then I came over to On Tour, and here we are. So yeah.
We all know that the cold side is where 80% of it happens.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, like, brewing beer isn't just knocking out and making wort and going home, So I think they liked over there, what they liked about me was that I was a cold side guy that could run around with clamps and hoses and hook stuff up. Whereas it's like a huge computerized video game to make hot side beer there, and people ask me about that stuff all the time. And I'm like, I don't know, that wasn't really my thing, because I was always like more of a smaller scale brew pubby guy. And I think they saw that in me, and they were like, all right, this guy's going to run around and hook up hoses and, throw beer into the bright tank and carb it and centrifuge and really just like hands-on stuff. And now that I'm on tour, that obviously hasn't changed. We're a hose connection brewery, we're running around. So yeah.
Yeah, speaking of equipment, I mean, that's one of the things that's fascinating to me in the distinction between when you're talking about smaller breweries, local breweries, brewery to brewery, is just their equipment setup. It's kind of how you mentioned something, well, that's just how we do things here. Well, it's based on your equipment. Give us a quick rundown on kind of your brewery.
At On Tour here currently?
Yeah.
Okay. So we do 15 barrel turns here. We do not have a mill, so our grain comes pre-milled. So we mash manually with 55-pound bags of grain. But we do have rakes that spin, which is nice. So you're not just a slave to the paddle. I mean, I throw the paddle in and mix it up, but we do have rakes spinning, mash mixer, and then we slaughter that over to our kettle, boil, a lot of 90-minute boils I mentioned earlier. And then we have a whirlpool vessel as well. So it's a 3-vessel system. And then we're knocking out into mostly 30-barrel fermenters. We have 4 30-barrel fermenters and 2 60-barrel fermenters. So most of our brew days are double turns of 15 barrels each. Mark starts in the morning. I come in, do another 15. Boom, we got 30 barrels of beer. If we're getting real crazy, like with our Lightning Will Pilsner, we might fill a 60-barrel batch, but that's not super common. And every now and then we do 15-barrel turns. Like, I'm pretty sure, yeah, this Maibock was a 15-barrel batch. We're kind of shifting into more double batches now because we pivoted into can production. We're trying to crank out more volume, but that's a whole nother story. And then our bright tanks are 30 barrels, and we do have 1 60-barrel fermenter. So if we are trying to get crazy with like that big batch of Pilsner and carb it up and get it out the door, we can do that. They're actually right behind me. If you look at these tanks, see the smaller one where you can actually see the top of it, and then the big one where you can't. And then we have 3 more 30-barrel bright tanks in our walk-in cooler, which hook up directly to draft line, which is nice. I always love drinking straight off the bright tank personally. And then we keg off of those, and we line up our kegs to the rest of the draft lines. I think our draft line system's like 10 or 12 now. Yeah.
You guys are still doing a lot of contract brewing, right? Or is that all you guys now?
What's your ratio between serving in the tap room versus packaging for distribution?
Yeah, so when this brewery started, before I worked here in 2017 till now, it was always basically modeled to be a taproom brewery. And anyone who's ever been here, I'm not trying to pat myself or Mark on the back, but it's nice. It's a nice staff room. Mark did a really killer job at designing that experience with the building. And, before I even got this job, I used to come and hang out here just because it's a great tap room and it's a fun place to sit and drink. So it was always a tap room brewery. And again, this beer is kind of a tap room hero. But yeah, we were never like a production facility per se, but then COVID pandemic stuff happened, and guess what? There is no tap room. So now it all got pivoted into big volume canning. So now we're taking maybe 10, 20 barrels at a time. We're doing can runs on it. We do mobile canning through Ironheart. I don't know if you guys can see my hat. They gave some swag the other day. But yeah, so we've had to pivot into like a tap room that's kind of like became a production facility, if that makes sense. And we've had to put out a lot more volume to pull that off, which has kind of been interesting. And now the tap room's starting to bubble back, and there's a decent amount of people here tonight, actually. So we have a distributor. We do self-distro in the city as well, but it was always about the tap room, and then it became about the cans, and now it's like a little bit, it's basically like half and half now for like our target projections. We're trying to say, all right, we're gonna make 30 barrels of beer. We're gonna give half of it to distro. We're gonna keep half of it here. And then we're sort of looking at the numbers as it plays out and say, all right, maybe you guys are selling more, so we go give you more, maybe less. Like, it's still being figured out with these projections on volume, because it's such a strange world that we live in right now with pandemic marketing, and like, we can make a bunch of beer and keg it, but who are we going to sell the kegs to? Are the bars opening? What's going on? So we've had to shift into cans like a lot of other people, where the margins aren't as great. But if you do a lot of volume and you get that wholesale, it's a check, it's cash flow, keeps you alive. So Mark's done a really great job at like adjusting into that pivot, but still maintaining the taproom presence as much as possible, I think.
And all your production is in-house. You don't outsource any of your production and canning.
Yeah, I didn't catch who mentioned contract brewing a second ago. I don't know if that was you, James. Okay,
No,
yeah.
that was me. I was mistaken. I was thinking of something else. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No problem.
That was my next question. Like, if you've ever given up any of your like production and canning just to kind of in a COVID time, or you're just all distro right now.
So we work with a distributor. We work with Heartland. Distributor is pretty much our main thing right now, but we have never done like a contract production run. Like, we have Great Central right down the street, which a lot of people are throwing, their recipes at to do big boy batches of. And I'm not saying that that's totally out of the question. It's something that would never happen, but currently we have not explored that route. We've made everything in-house, canned, kegged, hooked it up to bright tanks. Yeah.
Cool.
But Dave, while you've been talking, I thought I recognized you and recognized the name. I think we were both at Finch's at the same time. I was doing tours when you were an assistant brewer.
Oh, hell yeah. Okay.
Tours
Yeah.
Before Nick left.
Yeah, Nick Konwerski.
Yeah, I know
Yeah,
he
he's
was at Lagunitas for a while too.
Yeah, hell yeah. Now he's over at Three Floyds, killing it. So yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Good to see
I
you
was just
again,
like,
Chris.
holy shit, wait a second. Yeah.
Yeah, Finch's was like, it's like high school. It's like, oh, I think I know that guy, but it's like so many people came in and out of that place that work at other facilities now that, yeah, that kind of stuff happens to me all the time. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. We did work together. My bad. Yeah.
Around those tours was that was like a fucking college party every day. So
Oh yeah, it was wild. Yeah. Yeah.
Chris knows everyone.
Going back quickly to the Maibock recipe, it
Yeah.
seems that your recipe goes very much against the idea that a Maibock is a Helles with just a higher ABV, right? It's very far from what I would put in Helles. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, Michael, I think part of it too is, though, it's not just ingredients, it's process, right? And, so, they don't do decoction.
Yeah.
They don't do, a lot of the stuff that a German brewery is going to do in terms of process. And so they kind of came up with a recipe that gets them to the same end result. It's home brewers. I mean, that's just kind of, there's so many different ways to get to the same end point. But that's just my take on it.
Yeah.
The one thing about the recipe that and kind of what ends up in the glass, there's a little more kind of a caramelly character to this than I would have than I experience in German versions of it.
I think that would basically explain what Michael's point is, to me at least, because I was kind of siding with where he was going there, that to me this doesn't seem like a scale up from a Helles, but I think it's because of that caramely, I think of a Helles, I think of Pilsner, and Pilsner's the star, and if there's anything else surrounding that, it might be a little bit of Munich or something to like support it, but not that caramely flavor that we're getting in this.
But Sean, have you had Helles Bocks or Maibocks, that have that kind of rich, malty kind of character to it?
I mean, to your point earlier about not being able to get it very easily, the majority of my experience with Maibocks is at Mayfest in Lincoln Square here,
Right.
I think probably
I would say
6 months old German beer.
Yeah. But I think if you, I think Benny's will have the Eyinger, at least the Eyinger, if not one of the other ones, like closer to May. Benny should have those in stock.
Jeff, you said Dead Guy is considered a Maibock, right?
It is a Maibock, but it's made with ale yeast.
Well, that's in terms of
yes, it is.
It's a cold.
My recollection of the Dead Guy though is that it's also more aggressively hopped than
Dead Guy.
The German examples. It's an American take on it.
If you take a Dead Guy and pour it into a glass, I mean that's almost an American amber ale. So I think you're definitely looking at something that's more caramelly, redder. It's definitely got some malt presence to it that a Helles just doesn't have. If you just try and scale up a Helles and just say, well, I'm going to just do more of it, I don't think it's going to turn out like you're necessarily going to want it to.
Right. Although another way to think of it, I suppose, is, and again, this is on the homebrew scale, not the commercial scale, that to get to that kind of stronger Bock strength, you need to ramp up the maltiness, and you also need to ramp up the bitterness, so it's not exactly just the same beer, just with higher ABV. It's also, how do you ramp these things, these different characteristics up, but maintain the balance that you want? And also, well, I mean, this is a good example, but how do you deal with the alcohol, the higher ABV in a way that's pleasant and works with the other ingredients?
Yeah, and I think it's easy to get confused between the two because of the style guidelines. Both have Helles, but Helles is using as a descriptor for how it looks. I think a more accurate way to look at a Maibock would be the Dunkels Bock without the darker grains, or without as much caramelization, would actually be even better. Yeah. Because you really shouldn't be using darker grains in there. We do, but normally it would be like a lot of Munich and Vienna with caramelized, kettle caramel with Maillard reaction, but you would want, this would have like a Maibock should have less of the Maillard characteristics and more hops,
right?
A little bit more hop bitterness,
right?
Well,
that's exactly right, Jeff. That for most homebrew recipes for a Maibock, you're going to have significant amounts of Munich and or Vienna, which you don't have in the Helles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say
Maibock should just be considered a lighter colored version of a Dunkels Bock. Rather than a ramped up Helles.
Right, and that's kind of why we were circling around it both directions. Here's the Helles and here's the Dunkels Bock.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, we're talking a lot about the grain bill. The Pilsner malt is still the star of the show in terms of your bulk base, And then we got a little bit of Munich 1, a little bit of rye. And I think the key thing for us has been using the melanoidin as a way to sort of cheat past decoction, you know, and me and Jim talked about that a little bit earlier in the brewery today when we stopped by. And then also everyone's talking about like these Cara caramely flavors that are all over it. We usually use Cara pills to get a little bit of foam head retention. There's a Cara amber. So I don't know if that Cara amber is really like that potent that it's delivering those, or if it's really more off the Munich rye, melanoidin. And then there's a splash of acidulated. But in terms of like homebrewer adaptations for people that aren't trying to mess with decoction, like I personally don't do a lot of that, and it's not really in my experience range. When me and Mark discussed that, he was like, melanoidin gets you through that. So like you could make a pretty rockin' homebrew, I think, with a lot of Pilsner, a little bit of Munich rye, whatever you're trying to throw in there, and then melanoidin, and just ferment it with lager temps. You know what I mean? And I don't know if you guys wanted to get into
I love
that.
the melanoidin. I've used
Yeah,
it a
like
few
that's what I'm
times,
saying.
it
The
works great.
key,
You just got to be
melanoidin.
real delicate. You can't go much more than like a percentage or two.
Oh, it's so small. Like I'm looking at the recipe. Our total grist bill is 1,115 pounds, and there's 20 pounds of melanoidin. You know.
Or you could do what Hugh and Patty and I did last weekend and do 3 decoctions.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier too, Jim.
I was going to ask if
Awesome.
you decocted.
What's the percentage of Pilsner malt in this?
Hey, are you just gonna email us all the winning recipe?
Well, I just want to know the Pilsner. I mean, I want to know what the base malt is versus the. I'm not asking for the full recipe.
Sure. Let me do some quick math on my phone, and I'll tell
I mean, you could ballpark it. You don't have to tell. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact. But I mean, you're talking, is it like 75% or is it like 50%?
Yeah, I think, Sean, in brewing classic styles, it was somewhere in that 70 to 80%. They're significant in that, significant Munich and Vienna.
69%.
Okay, cool. That's kind of, I mean, 'cause
so
it is. Hey, Dave, what do you think about floor malted malts?
About what malted malts?
Floor malted.
Oh, okay.
Just like regular pills.
Yeah, I think you're okay with regular pills, personally, to tell you the truth.
Well, Wireman is kind of a standard, right?
Yeah.
And that's not floor malted, I don't imagine.
Well,
they have floor malted.
Are they?
I've been to like
they have
Bohemian pills. The Bohemian pills is floor malted, yeah.
I've been to the Breeze facility and saw that whole scene going down, which is pretty cool. But I can't speak 100% for our Pilsner malt on that end. I'm not sure. I could tell you it's Wireman, and we could probably all go research that. You know, it's Wireman Pilsner.
I think it's just different flavor profiles, right? I mean, you have the Barca pills, the Bohemian pills, and their standard pills. They're all from a world-class maltster. It's just a matter of what your flavor profile is and your mash requirements, because they all have different specs too.
Yeah, for sure.
But at the same time, if you have 30% specialty grains, just like what that recipe is calling for, would you really taste the subtle difference in the in the way you malt your Pilsner malt?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like Wireman makes great Pilsner malt, and I don't worry about it. It's the base. You know what I mean? But that's a great question, though. Actually, it's something that's for sure worth looking into maybe a little bit further.
I use it more. I use the specialty stuff for like a traditional Helles, because that's all you're tasting is that malt.
Right.
Do you have a favorite maltster, Sean?
For German, I mean, Wireman for German styles.
Yeah.
I really prefer that Barca line just because it's got the gelatinization temps for it. Like everything about it works well in my process. So
what do you think about Wireman versus the best malts?
Honestly, I'm a fairly new brewer, so I got turned on to some kind of best practice type stuff, and it's always worked well for me. So I've never brewed with anything other than Wireman for as far as lagers are concerned.
Yeah.
I just never seen, if I couldn't and I buy in bulk. So I mean, if I was buying by the pound, I might think differently because it's expensive to buy fireman by the pound. But
Hey, Dave, what are your thoughts, or what's the brewery's process with low oxygen and stuff like that, low dough?
Talking about like dissolved oxygen, like O2 levels.
Low dissolved oxygen.
mostly on the hot side, I think is where James is going.
I'm not sure I understand the question, to be honest.
Are there
in homebrew scale, in homebrew circles, low dissolved oxygen has become a major topic
Oh,
of
yeah.
conversation.
Okay, I could talk about DO for hours. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, cool.
On the hot side, though, not so
Right.
we all know on the
Yeah.
cold side, you avoided it
Sure.
like the plague, but
Yeah, right. That's what I mean, even at Lagunitas, that was my world in filtration, was DO meters everywhere and knocking it down. And where is it? Why is this happening? Let's fix it before it goes to the bright tank. But hot side, honestly, I don't do a ton of monitoring on that. Like here, I don't measure it. I don't know. So I
also think professional brewers don't have to.
None of the German lager brewers are. They're all doing fly sparging, right?
Yeah, that's how we're. Yeah,
You know, it's like what, that's got to be introducing dissolved oxygen on the hot side. It just has to.
Yeah. I just personally don't freak out about that stuff until cold side. You know what I mean? It's just like mash in, get it over, whirlpool. All right, now what's our DOA? What's going on? But that's a great question, though.
I think it's a much bigger issue for home brewers than it is for.
Well, I was gonna say it's a big issue of scale because when there's only a certain percentage of things exposed to the oxygen in a professional brewing setup versus home brewing.
Yeah, that's true. But I talked to a lot of home brewers that asked me about like purging your mash tun and things like that, and I don't do that. You know what I mean? I just I don't. A lot of people think that, like, oh, unless it's like a crazy kettle sour or something, but even then I've got away with pretty much ignoring that. So yeah, I think that's a good point with like equipment wise and like your hookups and your connections going into a carboy versus piped fittings and hoses and everything's packed, and like you just kind of trust the equipment a little more depending on the facility and what you're working with.
Well, I think Sean hit the nail on the head. It's a matter of scale. That for home brewers, it's a much more critical issue.
Hey, Dave, like when you're fermenting, do you for this particular beer or others like in similar category, do you ferment under pressure? Is it like just let it blow off?
Let it blow, baby. That's another question I get a lot. And something I've not done a lot of actually is under pressure. Well, I mean, there's some head pressure. Sometimes things get bunged up and it keeps going, but no, for the most part, it's blow off in a blow off tube to a bucket to a terminal. Yeah.
Are we done with the questions or something? Or
That was an awkward silence, though.
Everybody's almost done with their crowler.
We've made our way through 32 ounces.
I've asked a quota of questions.
Got really quiet for a second. It made me uncomfortable. All right.
I was thinking about oxygen.
Well, hey, I always have more questions. Do you guys knock down your mash pH before you pitch?
No.
Whatever it is in the mash, you just pitch at that?
Yeah, we like Mark, there's been a lot of monitoring of that to make sure the pH is at target and where we want it to be. But I think after a recipe's brewed a bunch of times, it's just kind of trusted. And then, we're just pitching and rocking out, to tell you the truth. Great question, though.
Again, I think that's a scale thing. I like to knock it down a bit just for the sake of making sure that it's protecting against undesirables.
I like that.
Giving the yeast a better environment to take off. But again, in your environment, just the nature of the massive pitch you're about to throw into it.
Right.
You know,
It's like it's gonna get cleaned up. It's gonna do its thing.
exactly.
If anything, we over pitch here. There's more cell counts than we need there to be, you know, but now I'm curious, like, again, being a guy that doesn't have as much homebrew experience as you guys, like, how do you deal with that? Like, what do you do to adjust pH?
So I that's actually an interesting point, because all the calculators out there are all based on mash pH. So
Right.
not many of them deal with post mash, you know, fermenter pH.
Well, you could always take a pH meter to your wort, though, like whenever.
Oh, I
you
do,
want. Yeah,
but
okay.
trying to guess how much acid to add, you know, how much phosphoric
Yeah.
acid to add at knockout, it can be
Yeah.
challenging. But I've actually found that it's fairly in line with the mash pH. So like if you know that your
Yeah,
mash
that's
is going to knock down this much, you can pretty much do the same thing. And I always just err on the side of a little
Right
bit
on.
less, because I can always add more.
Yeah,
And
we
I
do.
usually shoot for like a 5.1, somewhere in there before I
Okay.
pitch.
Yeah, we do phosphoric acid in the mash, and that's it, you know. So, but yeah, that sounds cool.
Sean, do you find a difference when you do that? When you adjust for
I
the-
find that my final pH ends up a little bit more in line with where I like it, kind of in that low to mid fours. Also, it just is going to help. I mean, I like to see activity within 6 to 8 hours of pitching, even in lagers.
Yeah. So do you notice a difference in the fermentation when you adjust the pH?
I do. I mean, it
Yeah.
seems to pick up quicker, finish faster, and I also just am a little bit more relaxed about, again, the infection.
The infections. Yeah.
Potential.
It's interesting.
And usually I'm not coming down that much. I mean, my mash pH after a boil, I'm usually at like 5.3, so it's not like I'm coming down a ton.
Hey, Sean, you might be interested in this, the Italian brewery that does the Italian pills, Burrifico Italiano. He does something I've never heard of before. He, in addition to the mash pH, he looks at the pH of the sparge water, and he does it way low. It's like 5.4, 5.5, something like that. I've never heard of that. So
I don't sparge.
I think I'm going to try it.
But
you just do batch or brewing?
I just do a single. I just do a
single infusion. Yeah.
I mean, I do a no sparge brewing, so my first wort is my wort.
That's it. Yeah.
I mean, it's wasteful.
You gotta add a little more water.
I take my my second runnings and make it into yeast starting
Cool.
wort.
Nice.
Hey, Dave, is this the only Bock you guys brew, or do you guys brew other Bocks as well?
So we have the Spectator, which is like sort of in that realm, but yeah, it's definitely the only Maibock.
When you guys gonna get music back in the tap room? Sorry.
Oh man, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm not going to say anything because I'll probably get in trouble for. But stay tuned. Announcements will be made. You know, we're still rolling our capacity. Kaylee, what do we have? 40% now capacity? Yeah. So we're at 40%.
Is that the official Chicago guidelines, 40%, or is that just what you guys decided?
It's the rules. We don't make
okay.
the rules. We just follow them, you know. But yeah, it's like I was saying earlier, On Tour was always a tap room vibe, and I kind of fell in love with the place after coming and drinking Medal Award winning beers and seeing Grateful Dead cover bands and little kids running around, very family friendly, and you know what I mean. So I'm definitely looking forward to making that happen, but we have to stay safe and follow the rules and all that good stuff. So that's more of a front of house issue, so I don't want to speak too much on it. I play music myself. Mark plays music as well. We've done a couple little acoustic gigs here and there. There's been some little spontaneous things like that, but we're not like actively booking bands and shows right now. It's just very low key kind of situation. but I'm not going to say that's not going to happen in the near future either. So definitely stay tuned. Social media announcements and whatnot. Because what goes better than beer and music together, right?
I have to say, when I pick up the beer, I wasn't really comfortable with what's happening in the in that room where they had large groups, but on the outside you had the very nice, the sidewalk, the braseros.
Yeah,
that is splendid.
Yeah, we realized that, like, regardless of what the city's rules are and what we're doing, that not everyone's going to be comfortable drinking and dining inside right now, and that's fine. So we try to cater to that audience as well. And so we have our outdoor, in the winter months, it's been like these bonfire reservations. And then as it gets warmer, you'll just be outside drinking beer. So for anyone that's not comfortable with an indoor tap room environment, that is an option. I see that a lot of places now that you can do inside, but not everybody maybe wants to. It's cool to have the option to go outside in a tent or under umbrella or a bonfire, and then the folks that are ready to go inside are inside. So I know that's a whole controversial thing. I don't want to spin down that rabbit hole, but I do want to make a point that we do have outdoor options available if that's your comfort level, for sure.
And it's really nice. They've got fire pits, and it's great fun. It's really a pleasant space. Hey, so I think we've been at this for a little more than 2 hours, which is probably enough. So
that only shows that we're all craving social interaction, right? We're like, yeah, let's chat a little bit more. Real people,
Yeah.
we'll take it, yes.
Yeah.
Well, this is the first time in more than a year where I've done any kind of intentional kind of guided tasting. So it's great.
Here, I'm sitting here watching this thinking I've been missing out on this for on a monthly basis.
Right. Yeah, it's great fun.
Yeah, I've heard of Chaos. I knew about you guys for a minute. I didn't realize you were right down the street until Jim told me today. But I do want to take a minute to thank everybody for bringing me in, and don't be a stranger. And I look forward to running you guys in the scene and elsewhere and everything. So it's been cool to interact in this. I had a great time.
Well, next time we have a quarterly party, we're gonna set up a jockey box for you, and you can bring some beers by.
Sounds good to me, man. Shoot me an email.
Yep.
And there's always music, Dave. We've got in our space, we sublet some of our space to Beer the Band.
Cool.
And so music and beer are your connection between music and beer is something we understand.
Absolutely. Awesome.
Did I hear correctly that On Tour is offering to step up the winner of that competition? That is fantastic. Good news.
Don't listen to him.
Best music and beer together.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else have anything else about the competition or about the style?
Who's going to drink all this leftover beer?
Yeah, I got a lot.
I've shockingly made quite a ways through the thing.
This thing is pretty light too. I know.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
Empty.
Now I got to go back to the. I got to go back to the Lifesblood.
Where's the empty crowler, people? Let's see what's going on here.
It's close.
Already been cleared, but I had
Getting
somebody
there?
to share it with.
I'm on a whole other beer now.
Not even close. Not even close.
No, I got.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. It was good seeing you all.
Good night.
Thank
All right.
you.
Cheers, guys.
See you tomorrow.
All right.
See you tomorrow,
Yeah.
Mark.
Thank all y'all.
Again,
You
Jim.
too, Mark.
This was awesome.
Thanks again, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. Good to see you, Chris.
Yeah.